Hey everyone, so I've been trying to make this update for a while now and I just haven't had the time. But the kids are actually taking a nap today, yay. So I figured I would jot down some notes so not to make this too long of a video, but I wanted to go ahead and give you an update on why I took a break from vlogging for a little bit. It's honestly just because I just didn't have the time. I was so busy helping take care of my dad and just emotionally, physically, just mentally, everything was just drained from me. So I took a little bit of a break, which I think was probably the best idea. It wasn't like a planned break, but it was just, I never picked up the camera to vlog anything because I was so busy. So everything started around January 21st. That was when my dad had his first episode of passing out. He's never passed out like this before, and essentially what had happened was his symptoms, he said, were his stomach was upset, and so he felt like he had to go to the bathroom. And when he went to the bathroom, he did have some diarrhea, and then he started feeling very sick to his stomach, like nauseated. So when he started feeling sick, he decided to stand up so he could turn around to actually vomit into the toilet. But when he stood up, he immediately passed out and hit the floor. My mom was actually asleep when this happened. It was really late at night. It was probably even, I think it was like 12 or 1 in the morning. But she was asleep, and the only thing that woke her up was she heard a boom in the bathroom, and then her dog started barking. When she went to check on my dad, he was up against the door, and so she had to kind of wedge her way inside the bathroom because he was blocking it. She ended up calling 911, and then essentially she called me and my brother, and we went to the hospital with him. He did go by ambulance, and by the time he got there, he seemed fine. They ran a bunch of tests on him, including blood work. They put a neck brace on him just in case. They did, I think it was like a chest x-ray. They did all kinds of stuff, and everything came back normal. Nothing was irregular. The only thing that was concerning was his blood pressure was a little low. By the time they got him to the hospital, his blood pressure was fine. They ended up, after giving him some fluids and running all those tests, they let him go. So he went home, and then the same thing happened a few days later. He passed out. My mom called 911 again and went back to the hospital. The same thing happened. They did all the same tests again just to double check everything, and then they were checking his blood pressure, and they gave him fluids, and they couldn't find anything, so they sent him home again. The third time he passed out, my mom did not call 911 because my dad caught himself before he passed out. Like, he felt like he was gonna pass out, and so he called her into the bathroom. She ended up setting up one of those like TV trays, and he just sat on the commode and put his head down and rested. He was probably in there for like an hour or so, and then he felt better, so he kind of just, you know, went on his way. But every time he passed out, he had the same symptoms. His stomach would start getting upset, he would have diarrhea, so he'd go to the bathroom, and then he'd feel nauseated, and then that's when he started passing out. So the third time, again, he didn't fully pass out, so we didn't have to go to the hospital that time, but he did have a doctor's appointment the next day with his regular doctor. And when he went in there, my mom told him about my dad almost passing out, and so they went ahead and admitted him to the hospital for, I think it was like 24 or 48 hours, just to do an EEG, I believe, and then they also wanted to monitor him. All of his tests came back normal again at the hospital, so he was released, and then literally a week later, he ended up passing out again. This time when he passed out, I guess he fell forward while he was, I don't even know if he was standing up or how it happened, but my mom and dad, they have this like pedestal sink, and somehow, I guess when he went forward, he ended up hitting his head on the pedestal sink, so he had this big knot on his head. My mom called 911 that time because he did actually fall and hit his head. Each time my dad passed out, it seemed like he would be kind of coherent, and then he would kind of just fade out again. And you can tell when he was like out because he would snore a little bit. So when the ambulance got there, they checked him out, and he seemed okay, but they went ahead and took him back to the hospital, which again, they gave him fluids, they ran all the tests again, and nothing came back, so they let him go. He did go to his primary care physician after that visit, and they ended up putting a heart monitor on him. They didn't really think there was anything wrong with his heart, but they were leaning more towards maybe he had a low blood pressure problem, and he is on some blood pressure medications and cholesterol medications and just different things. And so before they tweaked the medications, I guess they wanted to see if there was any issue with his heart. So again, at the moment, he is passing out, averaging at least once a week. So of course, after he gets the heart monitor on and he gets back home, a few days later or a week later, he passes out again, and this time it was really bad. I'm gonna call it the main event, so to speak, because it was horrible. My mom said she was in their bedroom and they were sleeping. My dad got up because he felt like he needed to go to the bathroom, and he didn't even make it out of the bedroom before passing out. My mom immediately heard him pass out, hit the floor, and she ended up calling me and my brother. We didn't call 911 this time because his doctor had said that there's really no need to go to the hospital each time it happens, because all they do is they pump him full of fluids and run some tests on him, and then they send him home because nothing comes back showing anything wrong. So that being said, my brother and I, we went and we kind of sat with him and tried to talk him through it. He, kept passing out over and over again. He'd be talking 1 minute and he couldn't move at all. Like, he was on the floor, literally dead weight. We couldn't lift him up or anything. But we thought that, like he had before, he would just come out of it if we just let him rest and just make sure he's okay. We did end up calling his doctor, who was, I guess, on call, so he answered the phone and explained what had happened, and he said, yeah, as long as he comes to, then there's no need to call 911. At this point, my dad unfortunately lost all controls of his bowels, and so my mom and I had to clean him up. I had to cut his underwear off of him, and we just made him as comfortable as possible. This whole time we're hitting that heart monitor so that it is monitoring everything going on as far as his heart rhythms and stuff. We tried giving him some water, but he couldn't suck out of a straw, so I ended up having to get one of the kids' medicine syringes and giving him water that way. It was just horrible. I mean, he just had no control over his body whatsoever. He couldn't even lift himself up. He didn't want you to move him at all, which we really wanted to get him downstairs. It was very scary too. It was just extremely scary. We ended up having to call a friend who lived down the street from us. He actually used to wrestle with my dad, and yes, my dad was a professional wrestler. He retired a few years ago, but my brother and him were able to get my dad downstairs, which was pretty difficult because my dad is a heavy man. I mean, he's just built big. He's not like overweight or anything. He's just built big, and just when you're trying to lift dead weight like that, it's very difficult. I think what we ended up having to do was we got a blanket and we put my dad in the blanket, and they lift up on the blanket to take him downstairs. But once we got him downstairs, we realized that he wasn't getting any better. He was actually starting to get a little cold, like to the touch and everything. So I told my mom, I'm like, look, it's been like, I think it was 2.5 hours at that point, almost 3 hours. I said, look, he's not getting any better. We need to call 911. My dad didn't want to go to the hospital, but at this point he really didn't have a choice. We called 911, the paramedics came again, and of course, each time they come, they usually have like one familiar face and then a few different faces come in, and always the one that's familiar to us, because that one person's been here so many times, is like, when are they gonna figure out what's going on with your dad? And I'm like, I don't know, Well, they try to get his vitals and everything. His blood pressure wouldn't even come up on the machines that they were using. So they rushed him to the emergency room. Once we got him to the hospital, the paramedics and everything, they were trying to get his blood pressure again, and it was extremely low, like deathly low. And honestly, I feel like if we waited too much longer, we probably wouldn't have been coming home with our dad. Like, it was that low. He was still having uncontrollable bowel movements. He was very cold. He doesn't even remember talking to me in the hospital, which, you know, I guess he was conscious, but he was just out of it, I guess. He doesn't remember a lot. The ER doctor that day seemed to be more concerned because that was his 5th time passing out, and this time something really was going on. Like, this doctor actually said he's not going to go home, he's going to be admitted to the hospital. So after many hours in the ER, they finally moved him to ICU because he was passing like straight blood. They couldn't figure out where it was coming from. His blood pressure was still very low for so long, and it was just crazy. It was just, my mind is so like foggy, like I don't remember everything. One reason he went to the ICU was they figured out he was septic, which is, I think it's like some type of infection in your blood, but they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. His stomach was really swollen, and so they figured that it was probably a gut problem, but they weren't really for sure. So while he was in ICU, he did see a GI doctor, and then he also seen a doctor who specializes in infectious diseases, I believe it's called. The whole time he was in ICU, he was on a bedpan. The nurses tried to get him off the bedpan multiple times, but he just had no control over his bowels, that he was comfortable on the bedpan. Of course, he couldn't get up and walk to the bathroom or anything like that. He had no energy, and he was in ICU for, I think it was 2 or 3 days, and then he was moved to his regular room where he was monitored again, and they were pumping him. All this time they were pumping him full of antibiotics, they were pumping him full of fluids. They ran some more tests. The only test they didn't run was an MRI with contrast because he couldn't fit into the MRI machine at the hospital. The only MRI machine that he could fit in is in the next city over, and it's an outpatient thing. They couldn't get that in, but they did do an ultrasound of his stomach, a couple other things I can't remember, but nothing showed anything abnormal. The ultrasound showed that his pancreas was a little swollen and his liver was a little swollen, but they figured that was probably from all the stress that happened when his body was almost shutting down, and then also all the fluids that they were pumping into him. He had to have a midline, I think it's called, put in his arm, because when he was in the ER and ICU for that matter, they couldn't get an IV in his veins to actually bleed. Like, they couldn't get blood from it. He was so dehydrated, which is kind of ironic because the night before he passed out, he was drinking tons of water, and for him to be dehydrated just means he lost a lot of fluid when he had like diarrhea and stuff. I spent almost a week in the hospital, so my mom ended up staying at our house. So our schedule for that week was basically, I took the kids to school, and then we went to visit my dad at the hospital, talk with his doctors, try to figure out what's going on. Then I would go pick the kids back up from school. My mother-in-law was able to help out a couple days, and then the days that I didn't have any help, I was able to leave the kids at preschool all day. Before he went into the hospital the last time, I had set him up for an MRI in a town near us, which was an open MRI, so he could fit in it. But it wasn't scheduled for a little while, and then they also had him set up for a colonoscopy and an endoscopy with his doctor at another hospital. But again, he went into the hospital before he could get those tests ran, which I think those tests probably would have shown something if there was anything. The GI doctor that was at the hospital where my dad was afraid to do a GI scope because he said that his intestines were probably inflamed, and it seemed like he was shedding some of his intestines, which would have caused some of the blood to come out. And he was afraid that if he were to go in, it's just more of a complication as far as possibly puncturing the intestines. So he didn't really want to do that until my dad was a little bit healed up. Also, while he was in the hospital, the infectious disease doctor came, and he explained to her that he had a tick on him. I think it was like a few weeks prior to him going into the hospital. So she ran some blood tests, and even though he didn't pass positive for Rocky Mount spotted fever. He didn't have a negative test either. So basically when they're doing that type of test, there's a gray area, and he was just in that gray area. So it was kind of like, it might be, it might not be. So they went ahead and put him on antibiotics for that. And I think that is about it. They let him go after about a week, and he's been home ever since. The past 2 weeks, knock on wood, fingers crossed, he has not passed out again. Granted, he is still having issues with his bowels, so I love my dad to death, and I hope he doesn't kill me for saying this, but he has been wearing what the kids call pull-ups, which is this adult Depends, because, you know, he's to that point where he feels like he has to go to the bathroom, and sometimes he doesn't make it. Like, it's that instant. The GI doctor did put him on Miralax and milk of magnesia, which is kind of, you're like, hey, he's going all the time, why does he need that stuff? Well, he thinks the part of the problem is my dad gets constipated and doesn't realize that he gets constipated. My dad used to go religiously 3 times a day, have bowel movements, and then he went to going maybe like once every few days, and the GI doctor thinks that he is getting backed up and it's stretching his colon and stuff, and somehow that's lowering his blood pressure and making him pass out. So they want to stop him from getting constipated, so they want to keep him going, which again really sucks because the poor man like lives on the toilet now. I suffer with IBS and I feel his pain. I mean, I remember when I was getting diagnosed with IBS, it was awful. I was just in the bathroom all the time. I couldn't eat anything without being afraid of going to the bathroom. You know, I didn't go out very much, so my dad literally has been at home most of the time because he's afraid that if he goes out, he's not going to be near a bathroom, and then, yeah. So anyway, other than that though, he's doing extremely well. He still has a heart monitor on, and we were actually able to get him to the MRI. So he had that done yesterday. Hopefully we'll get results from that within a couple days, and then he's scheduled for his colonoscopy with his regular GI doctor on Monday. So those are the last 2 tests that he has to have. So I'm hoping and praying that they show something so that we can figure out what's going on and correct the issue. He did have the GI scope finally done. It was more of an endoscopy at the hospital he was staying at. They ended up calling him randomly after he left the hospital and just said, hey, we need you to come over so we can do an endoscopy. And we were kind of confused, like, why are they doing an endoscopy now? Like, they weren't going to do it while you're in the hospital. Well, come to find out, because his pancreas was swollen, they had a doctor who specialized in that, and the doctor wanted just to make sure he didn't have pancreatic cancer, which of course put the fear of God in us, because, I mean, cancer, that C word, it's horrible. Like, whenever you hear that, you just pray that that's not the case. Thankfully, thanks to God, it was not the case. He does not have pancreatic cancer. They did go ahead and take a biopsy of his liver though, because he might have what's called fatty liver. There's an alcoholic fatty liver, and then there's a non-alcoholic fatty liver, and my dad, who has never drank alcohol in his life, he would fall in the non-alcoholic category, which typically can be corrected with exercise and diet. So if it is that, that's an easy fix. And then they also took some polyps out, which I think they were in his colon. And so they took some biopsies of stuff, and so we should get those back within a couple weeks. That's what's been going on. It's just been a long couple months lately, and it's just crazy how, like, 1 minute my dad's perfectly fine and the next minute he's passing out all the time. If any of you guys have had the same experience that my dad has had, please let me know, and that way, you know, we can kind of maybe help each other and rule things out. I don't know. We're just looking for answers, and unfortunately, the doctors are not able to give us anything right now. Again, hopefully the colonoscopy will show something, and then we can just fix whatever's going on. We did do a little research on, I think it's called the vagus nerve, but I think they ruled that out and said that they don't they don't believe that's what the case is. So yeah, so we're still kind of in the dark. We're praying for answers, and that's about it. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helped explain our absence, but we're back, and hopefully we'll be back for a while. I don't really have a schedule as far as when my vlogs will go up. I'm really trying to stay with the Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but I might tweak it here and there. I'm not sure why, because I haven't uploaded any videos in a while, but I do have a few new subscribers, so thank you for subscribing to my channel, and I hope you continue to watch our channel and become part of our community. And to those of you who have been subscribers and have been keeping up with us, thank you so much for continuing to support us. Alrighty guys, I've got some things to do, so if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you next time.